Just meditating, all of a sudden I'd be 5, 10 feet behind my body, kind of looking at my physical body from a distance. And that's the astral plane. It's a layer of reality, if you will. And I spent about 2 years seeing that all the time. And that was intense. That's what, after that initial opening, in that period of time, I saw a lot of strange stuff, if I'm totally honest. There are a lot of things floating around. You could call things beings or entities. Some people would go right into the world of angels and extraterrestrials or things like that. Sky's the limit is to just say what's beyond what we see with our senses. I mean, hey everyone, I'm Keith Parker and I'm on Your Superior Self.
Keith, my man, thank you so much for taking the time. I know we talked, it seems like a year ago, and talking about you coming on the show, and here we are today, finally. So thank you for being patient. Thank you for waiting this long time, it seems like, but I'm excited you're here.
Me too. Glad to be here. And amazingly, time has passed and here we both are still.
So much has changed since our last conversation. It seems like you're super busy nowadays.
I'm very busy at the moment, as we were just talking a moment. Your hair has gotten longer.
Really? I feel like it just, was it that short?
I don't know.
Um, I want to know, man, like we had a really interesting conversation prior to this. I want to know how do you experience reality?
Oh boy. You want to start surface? Is that how we're gonna do
Yeah, I
this?
want to start like lightly treading the water.
Okay. Well, I guess it's good to just give a bigger framework as to why, I'm on this podcast, why we connected. It's because I run an energy healing modality. We specialize in training people, and I do private session work with a lot of people. And the kind of the skill that stands out or is unusual that I talk about with people a lot, that it's like the food is the bulk of the nutrition, but then you get this special sauce like sriracha or something, and you're like all about the sauce. So in a certain sense, the sauce for me is that I see the aura really clearly. It's not something that I've been able to do my whole life, but it's something that happened after a lot of years of inner work and practice, and some big openings took place, and all of a sudden, this thing called the human aura, like enter the world of energy, if you will, the invisible, was just visible to me and also palpable, feeling it through my body as well. But the seeing the aura is the thing that people are really intrigued by in general.
Mm.
So yeah, so that informs the longer answer to how do I experience reality?
Is that distracting for you?
It is not distracting, and I don't see it in the way that you probably would think. It's been an evolution over the course of 9 years now since that started, if you will. So it's not distracting. It's not, don't view it in the way that you would think, probably. And furthermore, it did take about an initial 3 years after that kind of big experience to integrate and process and kind of acclimate my physiology and my mind to interacting with the energetic landscape and opening up to these other frequency ranges that we're all involved with moment to moment.
Hmm. So you say you don't experience it the way that we think. Like, how do you experience it though? Right? Like, what do you think we think? And
Yeah.
then how do you actually experience it?
Sure, sure. So it's a really common question. It requires a little bit. I should figure out a way to describe it like less technically, but I don't know a better way yet. In general, people think seeing the aura is gonna be like, oh, I look around and I see that there's these bubbles of color or light around people, and there's some kind of like information in there, maybe some kind of swirling, who knows? But one way or the other, people think of, oh, I just see somebody and then they just have this like color around them. That's a particular way of viewing the aura, and that would be what most people who do have that kind of clairvoyance would see. They would see this kind of swirling color surrounding a person, different colors. The colors are reflective, often more of their, you might say, their psycho-emotional state, but in particular, when you're seeing the aura with eyes open and the color kind of syrup, if you will, that a lot of people would see, you're really seeing more of an emotional tone than anything else. And that's viewing the astral plane. It's a particular level, it's a particular frequency range, it's a particular aspect of our subtle anatomy and the way our field is organized that is the first layer past the physical. So
Hmm.
you probably heard the word astral. Have you heard of the word astral before?
I hear it and I love it.
Yeah.
I love
It
talking about it.
Yeah, people who are into astral projection, out of body experiences, OBEs, lucid dreaming, all that stuff, they're really focused on working in that astral plane. It's also, in a sense, the vehicle of dreams. Like when we're dreaming, when we're not having REM sleep, our astral body is active and we're kind of psychically functioning within that space. And people, you don't have to take this from me. You can go to, astral projection communities, people who are very good at viewing at this particular level and they'll look at a bunch of people sleeping and their astral bodies are floating outside of their physical bodies. It disconnects and it floats up. And a lot of people have these spontaneous um, experiences of being in their astral body when they're meditating or when they're sleeping. They wake up and they're like floating on top of their room and they kind of go, "What's going on here?" A little bit of like a Willy Wonka kind of
Hmm.
moment.
Hmm.
Um, that happened to me multiple times when I first started to meditate. And I didn't know what in the world was happening, but I was just meditating. All of a sudden, I'd be 5, 10 feet behind my body, kind of looking at my physical body from a distance. And that's the astral plane. It's a layer of reality, if you will, that is adjacent to the physical and has a lot to do, I said, with dreaming, a lot to do with emotions as well. And I spent about 2 years seeing that all the time. And that was intense. That's what, after that initial opening, I was kind of always seeing the astral because it's kind of overlaid on the physical. It's like think of like
Mm.
the physical is one thing, and then if you get past like in a certain sense the frequency range that a human is used to seeing, it's almost like the vibrational rate changes such that the first layer you see, and you can see it with your eyes actually, is this thing called the astral plane. And it kind of is like a mirror of the physical, but it has these subtle, nuanced differences all the way out to very extraordinarily strange differences, but it can look really similar. Um,
Like
the
beings? Do you see beings at all?
In that period of time, I saw a lot of strange stuff, if I'm totally honest. There's there are a lot of things floating around when it comes to the subtle planes, if you will. And you could call things beings or entities. You could call them other forms of consciousness. Some people would go right into the world of angels and extraterrestrials or things like that. I mean, sky's the limit is to just say what's beyond what we see with our senses. I mean, a dog hears frequencies through a whistle that we know it makes a whistle and it's hearing this thing that
Sure.
exists, but we don't think is there, right? So just think of what it's like to open up the frequency range of human perception and to kind of consider that there's a lot more happening than meets the eye. So the way I see the aura now, which was years of development from that astral perception, is more of what is like classically described as sacred geometry, the light body, like the seven colors of the rainbow or the seven chakras, if you will, all have a very specific and clearly demarcated frequency band that's brilliant and pure. And that's what my vision is now, and it's like not with it's not with physical eyes. You can't see that with your physical eyes. It's what you see with your third eye, and that's what that thing is really in its more refined sense talked about in traditions. It's seeing this electromagnetic field that the body is within. That's our aura, and so it's an eye that sees. It's an electromagnetic eye that sees the electromagnetic domain, if you will. And the astral is not electromagnetic in the same way, which is why you can see it with your physical eyes. It's made of some kind of material that's in between what we generally think of as matter and goes towards this electromagnetic kind of these electromagnetic properties. And that's why plasma is often talked about in a lot of traditions, that what um, we've assigned the term plasma to in science is the fourth state of matter. It's the most common matter in the whole universe. There's more plasma than anything else. And when you look at what plasma does, what it does is it propagates electromagnetic current through it. It is infinite current. Like there's no resistance. It's a perfect conductor. So it's like this transition
Mm.
between the material and the immaterial.
Well, the thing that I think about when I hear plasma is what is that? These seances, right? Where they had like the
Sure.
plasma. What is that called? Do you know?
That's like the spiritualist movement where there are mediums, and the mediums are supposed to, in certain traditions, display a certain like ectoplasm, you're thinking probably, but
Hmm.
they're supposed to display a certain you have to like create a physical effect to show that what you're doing is bringing something through. So it's like if you're bringing in some kind of a spirit, they like get them to move a chair, or get them to open a window, or you can extrude this like substance that's called ectoplasm that has all of this, hype or notoriety around it from those traditions. I've never experienced anything like that. I'm not well learned in that stuff. It's not my domain of expertise at all.
Sure. So the process to opening up to these other realities, like what did that look like? Was it just straight meditation? Was it like certain types of meditation, Kriya yoga, yoga in general? Like, what did that look like?
Yeah, so I found that I was just really unhappy in life. Like when I was 28 years old and I was experiencing some kind of seasonal depression. I was living in New York as a musician, and everything looked good on paper. Like everything I wanted to achieve, I was achieving, but like internally something wasn't working. And so I just decided to leave all of it pretty much overnight. And I started to meditate a lot. And I went into Eastern traditions as a kind of connective point, particularly yoga and Buddhism. Buddhism was the more the meditative guidance, and yoga became the asana became for me a way to not just sit all day, but to sit and move and to continue my meditation practice. So I spent about 4.5, 5 years where I pretty much was doing that all the time. I mean, like, when it comes down to it, it was something like 6 to 8 hours a day. And so I was really, really hardcore. I did a lot of travel in India. I did a lot of time in silent meditation retreats, and I dedicated myself to that. My interest was in enlightenment. I was really curious. What in the world are they talking about? Like freedom, liberation, nirvana. Like these strange states of consciousness, jhana, samadhi, and that was like my goal was to kind of follow that prescribed path that both traditional yoga, Ashtanga yoga, and Buddhism both mapped out perfectly. They said, just do this stuff, do a lot of meditation, and start to realize what is the nature of what's happening moment to moment. What's the body and mind connection, and who is the self that is experiencing all of this? Is that permanent? Is that impermanent, etc.? So I did that for about 5 years. I definitely achieved what I wanted to in terms of, in a certain sense, getting to these states, refining these states of consciousness, samadhi and jhana, and I was experiencing I mean, I was a totally different person year after year. At a certain point, I started to study healing modalities as I tried to come back into society and think like, what could my career be? Like, what can I do? I left music, and I started to study healing modalities because I was intrigued. I felt like it brought together a lot of skill sets. And after about 2 years of doing that, I was mostly focusing on craniosacral work. And I had a clientele in Los Angeles. I had a good practice. I was teaching yoga and meditation, different places there, and doing a lot of body work with people. And craniosacral work is very good for um, really good for developing your perception in certain ways, learning to track energy, and learning to really listen to the nervous system. And so I did that for quite a while. And I think that the training, particularly the biodynamic approach to it, which is a whole other conversation, but particularly these kind of more subtle approaches to cranial work, really helped my system to entrain very to go very, very deeply into that body-mind connection. And that meditation or training process for me, I believe, was the a key in catalyzing what became a kind of a Kundalini awakening.
Hmm.
And Kundalini is a big word. There's a lot of stuff around it, but fundamentally, we have chakras. Your chakras are basically by default they're blocked. Like they're not all open. Nobody's are all open. Everybody think of, if everybody's thinking about this, think of your chakras as like an instrument. It's like different 7 notes on a scale. And everybody plays different music. That's called, who you are, your personality, like how you vibrate, how your mind works, how you interact with people and yourself. And so everybody has like different capacity to play different notes, if you will, but all of it's not open. The instrument's just not totally available for everyone. What Kundalini traditions are describing is that when you have a certain kind of catalytic event where the root is opened up and this kind of fire opens up this Shakti energy, it starts to open up the central channel. It starts to burn out any kind of hindrance, any kind of blockages that exist from the base up. And that opening creates a very, very accelerated process of change. It's like, you know, when it first happened to me, what happened in the course of 30 minutes was it was like my spine was plugged into a 1,000,000 volt electrical socket. And
Oh,
all of a sudden, this heat started to move through me, and it was this fire. And slowly, slowly, what started to happen is my sense of my body started to dematerialize. I was just standing in front of a mirror. I started to realize what was happening, like something very significant was happening. And this fire, which started as a kind of a bodily heat, went up, 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 up. And at a certain point, this sense of, are you willing to kind of let go came up. It was like, are you willing to let go? Like, and by letting go, I meant like, are you willing to let go of like who you are? Like, just if you kind of put this down, you don't exist. And that was like the gamble, if you will. It was like very clear. So I said, sure, let's go for it, you know? And in doing so, what happened is my sense of my physical body actually just started to dematerialize. I didn't feel my physical body anymore. And what came to the foreground was that I was actually space. I was actually the primary thing that was me became my field or my energy or the space that my body was in. And I still remained, the Keith was still there in a sense, or the I was still there, but my body just disappeared. And then there were kind of more subtle levels after that that had to do with even kind of the disintegration of existence itself, just like letting go of like, if you let go of this, even that seed that gives you the sense of like, I exist, not even Keith, but like I exist also is like kind of the gamble that you have to put the chips on the table to play and a willingness to kind of let go into that and, uh,
hmm.
made it through that passage as well. Um,
No
yeah,
biggie, no biggie, just
no
the
biggie.
annihilation of the ego, you know. So I'm very curious, right? Like that's man, there's so many questions in there. How did you support yourself during these 5 years in meditating for like 6 to 8 hours, right? Did you join an ashram where they supported your lifestyle?
I was very fortunate. I had a wonderful circumstance set up in New York. I was running a recording studio with a business partner, and we had a really good situation. It was a live work loft situation. And between the percentage stuff within the business and being able to sublet my room and savings, the combination of all of it made it such that I could basically spend the majority of the year not worrying about active income. And being in India, if you're in India a lot of the time, or in Asian countries, or any, disproportionate economy to the one you're in, um, I could live on $500 a month, you know.
Hmm.
So
Did you run
I
into
was pretty set.
any false gurus over there?
I was never the guru type. It's never really been my thing. I've always been more of a, do I resonate with this person or this teaching or not? And if I do, I'm gonna hang out with you or read your stuff or study with you, and I'm gonna absorb what I can, and then I'm probably gonna move on in a certain amount of time. Like a lifelong guruship or kind of some kind of devotional worship to a particular individual is something that is not really in my DNA. I don't think there's anything wrong with the guru tradition. There's a reason it exists. The reason in particular it works with India, but Westerners have a tougher time with it in general because we have much more of a kind of a stubborn, rubbery sense of ego and control over ourselves. And guru is about giving yourself over to a guru, but there's something valuable in it. Uh, However, I just find that there have always been certain people who exemplified the qualities and clearly had the wisdom to impart. And I always was attracted to those who, exuded those kinds of qualities.
Have you ever like stumbled upon someone that you just didn't resonate with? Or like, I mean, I guess my question is like, how do you discern that for yourself, whether those teachings are of truth or of um in your own best interest?
Good question. I mean, honestly, I don't think I ever went into much crosstalk of discernment personally because I think I just always knew immediately whether or not somebody had something for me or not. It was just like,
Mm.
like I never got into TM. Like I was exposed to that teacher, it just never for a second there was never any interest in me. But I was exposed to like Krishnamurti, and I immediately got into I wanted to learn a lot more about what Krishnamurti had to say. I didn't think about it for a second. It was just, am I attracted to this or not, and just trusting that.
Sure. Well, I just feel like, as a Westerner and, our I guess the way we have scripted our early lives with the church and the programs and the dogma, like we kind of do, give our power away to some type of belief system to where we want to be told what to do. We want to know what to believe in. Like, are we right or are we wrong? And I feel like when you get to that point of like searching for truth, India is like the natural place to go for like spiritual wisdom or knowledge, right? Because it's like it's so ancient, right? And so many great teachers have come out of India. And so like I feel like people that go over there searching for that guru because of that conditioning we have of like we need somebody to tell us what to do. Um, we fall into these traps where some spiritual teachers might not have our best interest. And then here we are paying thousands of dollars towards an ashram or something. You know what I mean? Like someone trying to show us enlightenment. And I don't know if that enlightenment ever comes, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there can always be trappings on the path for everybody, and we're supposed to hopefully learn from our mistakes and then look at our mistakes as not mistakes in that sense, right? That what we perceive as mistakes are actually stepping stones towards greater wisdom if we can orient ourselves to them as such. So there's a real attraction to us as Westerners, to Judaica tradition, European descendants, if you will, to exotic teachings that don't fit into the same box that we're used to. And there's a certain cliche in it, but at the same time, there is a difference between the way in which Eastern and Western traditions orient themselves to spirituality, religion, and the fundamental teachings about the nature of reality. They're very fundamentally different. And so, you know, like the biggest one being, of course, well, the two facets of the same thing are number one, God is within you in the East. Like if they don't, there's not really the word God is not really used, but the point is that whatever the divine is, it's not separate from you. And furthermore, if that happens to be true, you get to find that out for yourself. It's not something that you only read or believe in, but you have techniques and ability to find out directly 100% your own confirmation, your own discernment, whether or not that's true. In the West, it's completely opposite. It's just like God's outside of you and you don't get to judge that,
Sure.
and so it can be very appealing, very empowering to think, wow, whatever truth is, I can figure that out myself. And that's what I was excited about.
Yeah, that's what I'm excited about too. Like empowering the self to go search for that, right? But then you can also try too hard to find that truth, which leads you down different paths. And then to your point, your education might cost you something, right? You may go down the wrong path, but really, is it the wrong path if it brings you to a learning or a teaching or knowing yourself more intimately, right? I'm very interested in your Kundalini experience, diving more into that. You had this, I guess, dissolving of self, and experience yourself. I guess that's what they call the void, where you felt like the entirety of the field and the persona dissolved. And like, can you hit on that a little bit more? Is there, I mean, I know it's probably ineffable and you can't really, put words to it. But I mean, what was the realization in that moment?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack. I mean, Kundalini, as I was mentioning, it's really just a description, not Kundalini yoga, but the ancient traditions that describe Kundalini and the Shakti, if you will. It's really describing the what I would call the structure of enlightenment. And by that I mean when these caps, they're called granthis in the Kundalini tradition. You have seven chakras, but you have three granthis. Granthis are these coverings over the first, fourth, and sixth chakra. And when they open up through this fire that's ascending from below, what happens is you get access to, in a sense, the perception and frequency range of the different sections within your body and field. So the first granthi is at the root chakra. When that opens up, you feel your body in a very different way. It's like you could call it the etheric sheath, but it's really, in a sense, gaining huge amounts of access to the perception of what's happening in your physical body. The next Grante at your heart, when that opens up, you have this big opening to the astral plane because you open up to your astral body, right? It like lifts a cap off or a veil of the perception of this thing that becomes non-physical. And then the sixth chakra has a Grante as well. And when that opens up, the third eye has the possibility of really seeing the light body. You can connect to the electromagnetic field, which is totally immaterial, and that paves the way for the potential to then have that whole central channel opened up through the crown. And then basically the last steps there is to go all the way up and out the crown. And that's when you actually would get outside of any dualistic framework of body, mind, existence, non-existence, self, and other, dip into that void, dip into that nirvikalpa samadhi, nirvana, etc., and potentially touch into the ground of being, as it's called.
Hmm.
So
So
yeah.
I guess the void, right? But is there like when you hit that, because I've heard people describe that, and I don't mean to cut you off, my apologies. They feel a sense of depression when they get to this void. Like I guess it's how you perceive it, because there's a total realization that you are everything and you are it essentially, right? Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, how a person feels after the fact is going to just be individuated. We need to kind of get a perspective on what we're talking about here, which is we have a personal self that's in time and space, in history, has a narrative, right? It begins and it ends, it's born and it dies. And what we're talking about is the process by which people have mapped out and have experienced and described how it is that we actually can touch into the very source of time and space, the very source of beginnings and endings, and tap into the infinite, tap into the eternal, tap into that which doesn't begin and doesn't end. So there are parallel processes happening simultaneously in that you're historically existent right now in this body, in this time and space framework, right? But at every single moment is the instantiation or the intersection of infinity, of the nowness. We just call it presence, right? But you can kind of open up the veil that keeps you from seeing the totality of that and to realize that your source is the same source for everything, and that yeah, you're everything, you're nothing, you're your personality, you're the divine maybe, and that's not that doesn't detract from anybody else being that either, of course. That the essence in me is the same essence in all things and all people. And that's liberating. I mean, that's what the point of Buddhism is, for instance, it's freedom from suffering, and suffering ends because you end your ignorance, and ignorance is not knowing what's going on, essentially. It's like dukkha, as they call it, which means a bad fit. And a bad fit means like your perspective or your presumption about what's going on isn't actually correct. But when you correct it by directly knowing what it is, then you can align your presumptions about everything or what you understand everything is. And then you don't suffer because there's not this subtle internal stress that's resisting what's happening in a certain sense.
Hmm. How does it change you though, as Keith, when you come back, right? Instead, you can still see cool stuff, right? And see
Hmm.
different beings and different dimensions. But how does it change you as a person, right? Like, do you still have goals? Do you still strive for things? Do you still carry water? Like, I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, all along, every single, every person, a lot of the people listening to this obviously are doing inner work. They're seeking to become better people in one form or another, right? And when you do so, hopefully you do step in that direction, right? You keep improving yourself. You keep becoming more free. You keep becoming more capable. You keep working through the things that hold you back. You continue to be more present, more balanced, more peaceful internally, more loving towards other people and yourself. And so that has been a gradational change for me all along and continues to be a process. There are certain things like Kundalini, for instance, like these openings, they have very significant, they create huge openings very fast. They create massive amounts of leverage in your ability to make change. And sometimes they create a switch from one capacity to another. And so it just creates the potential for more change in a shorter amount of time. And sometimes it also becomes the only thing that enables you to access certain changes, if you will. So for me, uh, I mean, for me, I feel like all this has done over time is to alleviate whatever amount of stress I ever used to experience and just continue to dwindle that, approaching zero. Um, Not that I don't have any, but I'm saying it just keeps getting lower and lower and lower to the point where if I compared myself to 15 years ago, it's a night and day. I mean, it's not even comparable. My own presumption about who I am is totally different. And so I contextualize all experience totally different. Meaning, purpose, all of that is totally different to me from these experiences. Um,
Well, let me
but
ask you this,
also,
right? And I don't mean to cut you off. Like, I
no worries.
hate when people do that to me, and I hate when I do it to other
No
people.
worries.
But I will forget if I don't ask. So you said purpose, right? So is the
Yeah.
purpose to come here and have that self-realization of I'm the void, or is it having that realization and coming back in and working towards freedom? And it's like a two-part thing here. And what is freedom?
Hmm. Yeah. So I'll take the second piece first. Freedom is the ability to choose what you want to do and to do it. Like to choose how you're going to act and to be able to make that choice. And I don't mean just pure will, but I mean when you're not free, you're enslaved to your own inner demons, right? So when you're not free, it's like something comes up, it's challenging for you, and the versions of yourself that could potentially take action and moving forward, you choose a less skillful version. That's less and less free, all the way to the point in which we're machines and automatons, and we become these kind of robotic versions of ourselves where we're just reactive, trigger happy, don't have any free will, and we're just kind of sucked into patterns. We're just a pattern, predictable patterns. Freedom is when you can be unpredictable. Freedom's when something happens and you can see that you have myriad choices and you can choose higher and higher levels of skillfulness within the potentialities in that given moment. That to me is freedom. Now, there's other kinds of freedom. There's a more esoteric freedom, like reincarnational freedom, which would be like a Buddhist kind of freedom in the sense that you can end the cycles of birth and rebirth and stuff. But that's a little bit outside of the general human framework. That connects me, though, to the first thing you said, which is, are we supposed to do this, right? Number one, I respect everybody doing what it is they feel passionate and compelled to do in their life. I don't think there's a particular goal for being here necessarily, other than I would hope that most people can agree. I certainly would go for this one, is that people tend to believe that the better choice is to become a more mature person over the course of your lifetime, to be able to actually grow, evolve, adapt, mature, become more wise, like move in that direction. The flower goes towards the light. You
Hmm.
follow the natural pattern of what it means to grow and to be nourished and to thrive. And nature shows us that. And as a human, I hope that everybody at least thinks that that's a direction that they're interested in. Um, but when it comes to spiritual matters, I don't think that it's fair to impose our expectations on anybody as to what it's supposed to look like. Do people need to be spiritual? No. Is that necessarily important for people? No. Um, and furthermore, when we get to these more esoteric domains that we're talking about and touching into the void, I actually think that's overshooting the human spiritual um, assignment by quite a lot.
Really?
As far as I'm concerned, we're a third chakra consciousness. Okay. Like your third chakra is about your personality and your ego, basically. And you could think of all the chakras as looking through a lens of identity. It's like I peer through the window of a chakra and that chakra says, oh, you're this. It has a feedback loop that says you're this particular identity. So like animals are second chakra, for instance. Like their identity basically is like a composite of the body's consciousness. It doesn't have like a single point of a locus that's making decisions at one central organizational point. It's like the overall body is making decisions and it's kind of distributed. Human has an ego. It's like a collection that then gives us a sense of I and self. And that's what demarcates us between animals and us, in my opinion. And I can see it through this kind of theoretical model of chakra evolution, if you will. So a
Hmm.
human being to me is at a third chakra level, and civilizations at a third chakra level. It's very egoic. So all we have to do is graduate to the next grade. We get into the place where we actually break down the ego or the sense of separation of ourselves and others. We open our heart into compassion. We open our heart into love. We open our heart into understanding and acceptance. And those are the qualities that would demarcate a gradational shift upward. We're not there. I mean, obviously, the human condition, we tend to like hoard our resources. We tend to, we're very fixated on boundaries and territories and like this is mine and this is yours. And sharing and cooperation isn't inbuilt into the general way in which we're functioning. I mean, when you really take a fair assessment of how we function as a world, I think that we're kind of, in like I don't know what we teach kids in third or fourth grade, like share in the sandbox kind of stuff. We like if you sublimate that to a world level, that's literally kind of the function that we're still kind of working through to mature through. Um, and so I think that the human quest, you could think of this as the soul's quest, that the soul, which would be like the spiritualized human, if you will, like when you say, oh, you're a really nice human versus you're a really nice soul, right? You're not saying that you're human, you're somehow adding the flavor of spirit in there, right?
Hmm.
So at that soul level, I would say that what we're being asked to do at that spiritual kind of assignment, if you will, is to graduate from 3 to 4, which just means open your heart. It just means like love yourself and love other people, which means you have to really get through your judgments of other people and your judgments of the world, and your because judgment keeps us separate. When we judge other things and we say like that's not me and this is me, like what they're doing, I'm not capable of that, right? So I'm separate from them. And then from that vantage point, I can judge them as bad and I'm good.
Hmm.
And that keeps us in separation. When we can open our hearts, which is why compassion is such a big and dominant thing in Eastern traditions, or forgiveness is a big dominant thing in Western traditions. These are these qualities, compassion and forgiveness, these practices that open our hearts to the suffering, and the human condition in all people.
I love that. So what's the seventh chakra, right? Like, would that be, what type of entity would be representative of that?
Um, so in a certain sense, if we think of the chakra system, your root chakra is vertically oriented up down. It connects into the earth. The seventh chakra is also up down. It connects up into the sky in a sense. And the first and the seventh chakra are really just entry and exit points into the system. They're not really like uh they're not stations that you kind of stay at. They're entry and exit points. They're an IO system.
Hmm.
So it's really the second through the sixth chakra that has kind of a focal point, if you will. So seventh isn't really a place to stay. Seventh is like a just a transition point. It's a quick up and out.
Get me out of here, right?
Yeah, it's basically like leaving the system kind of thing. And again, this is, a human being can access these depths, 100%. I mean, look, it's not just the Eastern tradition and chakras, it's the tree of life from the Kabbalistic traditions. That's why like yarmulkes are worn by, people who are devout in their Judaic practice. It's why people wear turbans and, and Sikh traditions. Like every head covering from every Western tradition, in a certain sense, is a recognition that this top of the head is the connection up and out of the system. And so there's a certain kind of acknowledgement through fashion, if we can think of it that way. Spiritual fashion.
Have you ever fully like fully, I should say, I should reword this. Have you ever interacted with a fully realized individual, like, someone that was totally awakened and, I guess the fully ideal spiritual person?
I don't think that there's perfection within human form in the sense of it being 100%. To say fully realized, you could say like a person has gone as far as they can go, meaning they've opened up the centers, they've traversed things, they have fluidity within all aspects of themselves. But I don't think there's a version of a person who has zero stuff, zero karma, zero distortion. A person, by definition, is a personality, is wearing a mask, persona, mask, personality.
Hmm.
So the nature of being in this form and being a human is that there's a massive amount of stuff that we come into life with, massive, massive, massive. And there's no such thing as getting that to be zero. Like you could just say if it was zero in anybody, they would have no reason to be here.
Sure.
But no, I've never met anybody who is perfected to the point of nothing's there. But have I connected to certain teachers when I feel into them that they've gone extremely far in cleaning up to the degree that's like is about as far as they can go? Yeah, I do think so.
Hmm. Have you ever played around in the astral realities?
Sure. I mean, like I said, I had about 2 years there where it was full time for me, that just waking state all day. It was just weird interactions all the time. And I didn't have a belief system about these things. I didn't believe in them. I was just being thrown into it. It's like the water doesn't exist. Okay, well, here, get in the pool. It's like learn to swim. It was really intense, at various levels, not only because of the interactions I was having with other humans and other things kind of floating around. But also because when you open up that astral level and that Kundalini opening really brings about a massive access to your energy and your internal state so much more intensely. I was able to touch into my deep psyche and my shadow so effortlessly and I mean, I don't ever much talk about this anymore, but it was like a period of what I would call hypersensitivity, where it was like the normal meter that my reference was for sensation was 0 to 10. And post that experience, it went from a 0 to 100. And I had to acclimate that 90 degrees of increase for years because of how much more intense the feeling, the emotion was just touching something, feeling something, it was really, really unusual. But I've acclimated at this point, and I've cleared those things. That's the point of it, is you're just thrust into it because that opening enables you to really clean house very fast. What could be done in maybe 10 or 20 years, maybe is done in a year or two.
Hmm.
And my practice for 2 years straight there was just cleaning up that astral stuff. And then I had a shift about a year and a half after that initial experience, that the crown area opened up more, and I had more kind of weird esoteric kind of experiences, and things really shifted for me. And kind of, I'd say, like, that circuit was completed in a way.
That's awesome, man. Good for you.
Yeah.
Good on you. What are some of our misconceptions of the astral world, right? Or is it true reality? Like what, I mean, can you affect this reality from there? Can you change future timelines from there? I mean, what type of work can you do from there? And like what are some of the misconceptions that we think about it?
Sure. Well, I want to broaden this out and not just keep it to the astral, but to talk about our aura, because the astral is just one aspect of it. Um, the astral occupies the fourth plane, or the fourth dimension, if you will, the plane of the heart. But there's five, six, and seven on top of it. And what the astral serves is, it's kind of a transition zone. Just as I was saying, the material there is like a transitional material, like plasma. It's a kind of a transition zone between the upper levels and the lower levels. And the lower levels are what we basically call physical, and the upper levels are basically what we tend to think of as mind. Now, in a certain sense, all of it is mind, okay? But um, when you have a thought, okay, a thought has a form. So I can see this really clearly, but this is, talked about for a very long time. So when I think, if I close my eyes and I have a thought, the thought generates a certain form within my field. And that form originally is something like a geometric shape. It's a multi-dimensional geometric shape. And that's like in its static form, but then it's cycling into the field, because your field's always rotating. Think of it as like a cyclone or a vortex. It's always rotating, and every thought you have, every emotion you have, feeds into this kind of inner landscape of rotation and energy flow. So in those higher dimensions, it's more of like a geometric form that represents the information of the thought.
Hmm.
When it makes its way down through the dimensions and you pass through the astral, the thought becomes an actual, like, visible form, if you will, on the astral plane. The astral is like the intermediary. It's where thoughts are things and things are thoughts. It's also, when, if you think of it in terms of numbers, you have seven chakras, three above, three below, one in the center. So the one in the center, the heart, and the fourth, and the astral, they're all very paradoxical. It's very strange because it's a place of like balance between two forces interacting. So thoughts are things and things are thoughts. So if you're, for instance, if you're having a lucid dream, this is the point of lucid dreaming practice, is wake up in your dream, means wake up in the astral,
Hmm.
and then think of something and it'll happen immediately,
Hmm.
right? Think of a hamburger. Oh my God, I'm holding a hamburger. Think of flying on a carpet. I'm flying on a carpet. Thoughts are things and things are thoughts. When we go up into the higher dimensions, as I mentioned, it's a geometric thing that is, in a sense, the polar opposite of what we see as physical reality. Whereas physical reality, everything's curved, right, and it's made of matter.
Hmm.
Um, in the higher dimensions and in your light body, everything is geometric and it has kind of straight lines. And there's a centripetal or centrifugal force, is a rotational force that's curved in a sense, but the structures are more geometric in nature. This is where the world of sacred geometry comes from and stuff.
Hmm.
So the idea of manifestation is, can you take a thought, right, and then bring it all the way down through the different centers and manifest that as actually into physical reality? And so that's, of course, all kinds of practices can help empower and facilitate manifestation and stuff. But that word manifestation is not a place that I spend a lot of time with. It's not really also a part of. So yeah, I don't bring that much emphasis to that word.
Sure. So your thoughts, right? Do you believe in like an oversoul or a higher self or anything of that label or semantics, lexicon, whatever you want to call that? And if you do you think that our goals in this reality are the persona's goals, or is it the higher self's goals?
Hmm. Good question. And I just want to take a moment to put a big asterisk of a disclaimer to say, anybody listening to this who's found it interesting but thinks I'm a nut, or who thinks, wow, this guy really knows a lot. I just want to say all of this is like theoretical, and that I am not telling anybody who's hearing this. I want to just posit and orient all of this as this is my understanding, this is my experience. This I can provide very maybe compelling or rational frameworks or fancy words or whatever it might be that sounds like I really know what I'm talking about. But trust me, I just want to say that this is like I don't want to say this is the truth, and if you disagree, you're wrong. And I don't want to tell people if you weren't aware of this, then you just didn't know what's up. Like if it resonates with you, great. And if it doesn't, great, no problem. But in talking about this stuff, I just want to make sure that everybody gets that. To me, this is me sharing my experience and my understanding best I
Sure,
can, and it's not me right and you wrong if you disagree.
sure.
Um, Humility is one of those important things for me. And speaking of teachers, I could never get into any teachers that I felt didn't truly have humility. Even if it doesn't seem like they're humble on the surface, if I tune into them and they weren't humble, I just couldn't vibe there. Humility is a sign of maturity to me. Um, what did you ask about?
Well, one, if you believe in that we have a higher self, like
Okay.
is our goals here like the persona's goals, or is it the higher self's goals?
Yeah. So I 100% believe we have a higher self. In fact, higher self is a component in some of what we do with energy healing. It's one of the aspects of higher consciousness that we can work with and find out whether or not there is a higher self by simply learning to basically communicate with it. And it it's very responsive and omnipresent in our experience here. So higher self is just an aspect of you. Higher self is just it's actually a layer of your field. It's a layer of the mind, if you will, a very particularly evolved aspect of yourself that is not your personality, but is folded into it, if you will. And I don't think that we're here to work through the higher self's desires, so to speak. The higher self could be thought of as a kind of a guide, an inbuilt interior guide, a master guide, if you will, that has a lot of wisdom and knowledge. And again, it's like it's an aspect that is already a part of everyone's experience right now. You are experiencing yourself and you think it's just a persona, but it's lots of layers of the mind, lots of layers of the self all interacting harmoniously. And you've been habituated to refer and to think of yourself as just, oh, I'm just Keith, and that's the only thing that's thinking right now. But when you really break down and kind of reverse engineer the layers of the mind, they have different facets and functions and stuff, and you can start to see them clearly. It's like, again, with like music, we're unconsciously kind of in this sleepful state where we're so enticed by the music. It's like, there's rhythm and there's harmony and melody, and it's beautiful, and I'm so enraptured and captivated by it. But what a meditator's doing, like very hardcore, strict traditional meditation, what they're doing is they're going in, they're learning to situate themselves in the very center, and you could call that the silence, right, where all the music is kind of emanating from. And they're learning to go in and hit the mute button or turn the volume down on each of the different channels on the mixing board to find out that all of it's coming out of nothing, and to be able to look at each of the different pieces piece by piece. So you reverse engineer all the layers of it and find out that at the bottom it's all emerging from silence or emptiness or void, as you called it.
Mm, I love that. Well, going back to music, right? I feel like if we can tap into a certain resonance, right? The tone, the one tone that's playing everything. Like even like the pyramids, I think I've never been there, but I've heard like stories that there's like a king's chamber and you can make a sound and it resonates and it gets you up to a certain tone and you can receive, I don't know, maybe a download or some type of guidance. But it's all through a certain particular frequency. Have you ever experienced that or seen that, like in your reality, where if you hit certain frequencies in your body, like through meditation, through I don't know, yoga or working out or whatever, breath work, like once your body, your cellular makeup hits a certain frequency, you start tapping into that higher state of mind that is knowing everything all at once.
Well, knowing everything all at once is a lot, right? But that's possible. Um, that's no, that's nice though. Omniscience is a lofty goal, but
Let's just go.
uh,
Let's baby step it. Like if you can get into a higher frequency
yeah,
doing
yeah.
certain things, practices, can you tap
So
into something higher?
yeah, so let's think of this like think of it structurally in your field. Let's just say that, as I said, you have an energy field. We have a bunch of chakras. Those chakras are actually, in a certain sense, the different notes that make up your field. So your field's like an onion. There's layers, 7 layers. And those different layers are comprised of different frequency ranges. And as we said, it's like each of those layers has to do something with identity. It has to do with functioning of the mind, but it also has to do with kind of the broadcasting of certain information. So when we think of like what we tend to function within, which is a certain set or frequency range within the total capacity of our field, of our mental functioning, then we are limited in the way that we can access the information that's present at the moment. So when we meditate, when we find ourselves in flow states, when we have epiphanies, right? What we're essentially doing structurally is we're expanding our consciousness, expanding our reach within the domain within our field, and we're accessing more of the information that's present, and we're tapping into more of what we have as our potential and capacities of mind. And that's basically all that's happening. So, whilst it might be initially for some people, oh, I meditate for half hour and then I start to get really relaxed and I start to feel this expansion and then I start to think much more clearly. Great. What you're literally doing is expanding your mind in a sense and starting to open up to different frequency ranges or to become aware of different dimensions of functioning within the mind. But you can also learn to kind of break down those barriers and have access to it a lot of the time, which is what long-term development is all about. Is like these aren't whilst they're originally transient and augmented experiences, in the long term, if they're integrated properly, all of it is available all the time.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so fascinating. When you were out traveling in the astral and the different dimensions, do you ever research like can you see the Akashic records? Can you see like, humanity start, any type of history, like whatever, you're interested by? Did you ever research that like in the records to find out more?
So, okay, this is a great point. You're giving huge opportunity here to describe something important. Um, Akasha means space, right? Akasha just means space. It's the fifth element in the yogic tradition. In the Grecian tradition, it's called ether, and it's represented in the Platonic solids by the dodecahedron. But in the yoga, it's just called Akasha, and it's where it's like ascribed to the throat chakra, but it demarcates the element of space. 4 elements that we're used to, and then the fifth is space. So just like silence and sound, Akasha is the space, and then the 4 elements are the formations of matter within space, right?
Hmm.
So the idea of the Akashic Records means it's the records in space, it's the information in space. So what they're talking about with Akashic Records is there's no library out there, okay? The library's everywhere because everything is here in space, right? So if you start to think of like models of reality science as described to us, for instance, holographic reality, right? So holographic reality would suggest that in every part, the whole, meaning that every single piece of the entirety of reality is distributed in every single part of it, literally. So that like your thumbnail contains the information of the entire universe. Every atom contains the information, the entire universe. That's a holographic model of reality. It's a scientific thing and a reasonable theoretical speculation that a lot of big time physicists believe is true. This was also understood 3,000 years ago by yogis. They had this thing called, there's a mythology called Indra's net. And they say that Indra put this net of jewels out and threw the net across the universe, and every jewel was the replica of one another. And he beholds one jewel, looks into the jewel, and in the one jewel is reflected infinitely all the other jewels. So it's saying that everything can be seen through one point, and every point has that same access to everything else. So when we say Akashic Records, all we're talking about is you can tap into space, which is right here, and you can read the information, which is that all information is distributed everywhere, right? So
Hmm.
Akashic Records isn't, you don't go to a library, it's here. You just have to learn to tap into it, to have a mechanism or a technique to extract information. And then you have to have the skill to read that information. And that ability to read the information is like psychic ability, if you will. It's clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience, empathic abilities, different things that we call extrasensory perception. Those are the sublimations of our physical sensing into, instead of reading physical matter, we're reading electromagnetic matter, if you will, or electromagnetic information.
Hmm.
Um, so anybody can read the Akashic Records, and energy healing is a practice of working with this principle to bring in changes to your aura by learning how to tap into this universal information distribution. We think that it's really cool that you have like Netflix on TV and stuff and like on your phone, and it's like, oh, information's on this unit and on this unit and this unit. When it comes to the universe, a totally radical model is that literally the entire universe is entangled with itself, meaning that it's all caught up within itself and that every single point gives you access to every other single point. And there are myriad examples in science that would back this up that are beyond just holographic, but I don't need to go into them and explain it. But from my own direct perception and how things work, I would say that what practice I do and teach other people with energy work really wouldn't be possible unless this level of interconnectivity existed.
Mm. So you develop those skills to tap into that.
100%. I mean, I see the field, I see what happens when I think or intend or invoke or talk to or try and access certain kinds of information. I notice how that's happening structurally, and then I use different kinds of sense perception to try and translate or read that information through the faculties that work for me, and then that translates into, certain kinds of knowledge or information, what have you.
Hmm.
But it's not so much, I'm not particularly interested in the interpretive level of things. I'm more interested in the result of things. It's not, I mean, like a traditional psychic, for instance, a traditional psychic, crystal ball kind of vibe, they're like telling you all kinds of stuff that they may or may not know. Okay. So they're really relying on interpretation as a means to have a practice. Energy
Hmm.
work and what I do with other people and stuff, we're not relying on interpretation. We're making something happen, and then we're receiving the benefits of the changes that take place as a result of that. Now, if we interpret things and we understand things, we have insight, or we simply interpret and we take a guess and it's correct or incorrect, it doesn't matter in relation to the actual changes that take place.
So you've never became curious, like, I mean, going back and searching through time, like to see like the Mandela effect, like is that like a real thing? Like that, you know what I mean? Like there's crazy scenarios that have taken place in or have they taken place in history? Like, I mean, do you ever explore those like alternative timelines to see, what if Hitler won? Like, I mean, I'm sure that information's probably out there somewhere, but I don't know. Like Tom Campbell is a big um teacher in this is a virtual reality, and he's had a ton of out of body experiences, and he talks about the tapping into the records and seeing different, into the universe and seeing different outcomes. And I'm like, well, who built the pyramids? Like who did that kind of stuff? Like I'm more interested
Sure.
in that right now, right? I mean, it's just something, and UFOs and UAPs. It's like I don't think personally, my interpretation is that they're not extraterrestrial. It's like interdimensional almost, right? Like talking to your point of like beings and the astral realities. I feel like people when they have these types of experiences, for whatever reason, they're able to shut down a part of the brain where they can now see into different dimensions, and like they're just crossing over and having an experience. And I also think that's probably for the greater good. I think something larger than us is trying to get our attention and like tell us that there's something more to this reality than what we think. Obviously, people that haven't meditated for 6 to 8 hours a day and had the Kundalini awakening, we still, well, I think we still perceive reality as status quo. And that's why you see a lot of, left and right arguments and why you see such dualism. But I feel like if I had the ability to tap in, maybe it would just be like a kid in the candy store and how to be like
Mhm.
going back in the history and like, how did we originate, right? Like, I mean, is panspermia a real thing? Like where did life on Earth come from? I mean, I'm just so curious to like, how did we evolve? Like, how did, think about it. Everything, all the chances of us having this conversation right now, the probability of this, right? Like our great grandparents meeting, having, you know, getting married and doing all the rituals, and now you and I are here having this conversation about consciousness, everything that had to unfold for this moment to happen. Like to me,
Mhm.
that's fascinating. And I just feel like I would have a field day. Like you just kind of like, yeah, I'm good, man. I've had that void experience. I'm good to go.
I appreciate your curiosity, and I think that in my own way, I spent probably about 5 years initially trying to make sense of things and really looking into a lot of alternative ways to understand what's going on, because clearly what I had been taught and what our society thinks is going on wasn't the case. I mean, all of a sudden I'm experiencing moment to moment reality that is 100% not mainstream, not, not scientific, right? And I knew it's true because it's just happening. And I find that esoteric texts and new age and, weird corners of the world are talking about different kinds of, theories or, different kinds of explanations. But again, very esoteric things at corners of the world, whether it be ancient or modern, doesn't matter still, the strange stuff that most people don't talk about. I explored those possibilities quite extensively to satisfy my own curiosities and stuff. And in the end, where things have come around to me is actually bringing things down to a practical level.
Mm,
So as much as I think that that stuff is important, I think it's just important that people follow their passion and their curiosity in any given moment, and to know that generally it's a phase, if you will, however long or short. And for me, the phase that I'm in is um, how do I make this insight and ability that I have and understanding, how do I make it so that I can help other people in a way that's grounded, cogent, cohesive, approachable, acceptable, communicable to the mainstream? And that's why I started energy healing, an energy healing modality with Christabel. We started field dynamics to give people a format to learn how to practice energy work so that they could make significant changes in their life in a way that improves them, helps them, reduces their suffering, creates more freedom. And I get to explore all of this more esoteric stuff in the sense of getting into these concepts and frameworks of deep levels of interconnectivity, getting into the structure of the aura, getting into energetic and subtle energetic perceptual development in people and helping them with all that. But fundamentally, to take all of this off the table knowledge, off the page knowledge, and to make it practical and to make it accessible to people who are skeptical, who are curious, who are eager, and who are looking for this kind of work to make big changes in their life.
mm. So if mainstream media, the mainstream, had the slightest insight of what true reality is or may be, like how much difference would there be, right, from right now to what it could be?
I mean, the thing is I would say we're just existing in a radically different reality than we think. And there's two primary things going on that are very, very different than what our civilization is currently at in terms of understanding. One, to me, is further off than the other. The one that's closer has to do with interconnectivity. So we are radically interconnected in a way that we have absolutely no idea. And what's happening is our technology is actually mimicking how the universe is structured. So we're growing the internet, we're growing our interconnectivity, we're having information be distributed faster and faster and more simultaneously everywhere on the planet. And that's the big change that's happened in the past 25, 30 years in particular. You could say the last 100 plus years, but in particular, since the advent of the digital age, and the internet and cell phones, smartphones, we're in a totally different mode of function than we were before. And that's only going to increase. We see AIs coming on the scene now. There's going to be a whole nother phase shift in these next 10 years. Um, but to me, that is actually a mimicry of how the universe itself is structured. So we have biomimetics, which is the copying of natural kinds of strategies and adaptations to then make technology out of them. I've coined a term, I have a book coming out later this year. I've coined a term called cosmometics, which is the mimicry of the cosmos, the mimicry of the way the universe is organized, and making technology out of that. And I would say that the internet already falls into that category, but increasingly, I think that's what our technology is going to keep looking like. We don't yet know as a society or civilization that that's what we're kind of moving into, but reality is deeply interconnected. And there's all kinds of stuff in science that already proves this. And in fact, what I understand, because I'm not a physicist and I'm not in those communities, but 10 years ago, there was a study at the Large Hadron Collider, that the biggest particle accelerator in the world. And they found this thing called, or discovered mathematically, a thing they call the amplitahedron. And what it is, it's a geometry that exists outside of time and space. And that basically that geometry outside of time and space is a non-local origin of all time and space. Meaning that if you were to zoom in on reality at any point in it, in this entire universe, if you zoomed in to the Planck length and went under that, meaning the unit of measurement which there is time and space, the volume in which time and space exists. If you go underneath that threshold, there's just one object that every single point in this entire universe connects us to. So we're all connected to a single origination point. And this has been mathematically proven. And that was 10 years ago. Now, I've heard through certain other physicists and people in that world that they say that the hot thing, the big thing in scientific communities and physicists and mathematics communities is what exists outside of time and space. That's the hot thing that's going on now for a while. What exists outside of time and space? Outside of time and space is exactly what spiritual traditions is talking about. What does transcendence mean? Transcendence means getting beyond duality, so beyond the duality of time and space, beyond the duality of mind and body, beyond the duality of beginning and ending, right? So science is already going into these domains that are very mystical and very spiritual oriented in terms of the language, but this is where we're headed. And we're going to start to increase our ability to have technology based in this, whether it be medical, social, educational. It might also be the key to, some of these larger kind of inclinations that the kind of cutting edge rich are doing right now, which is like intergalactic kind of stuff, like exploring other planets, exploring the cosmos, if you will, right? Naturally, we might have other modes of being able to access this stuff if we actually start to understand the underlying structure, the substructure of reality. Eric Weinstein, actually, if you know who that is,
Mhm.
he actually talks about this from a higher dimensional physics standpoint. He says that no, we shouldn't use rocket fuel to go from point A to Z. We need to learn how to actually enfold higher dimensions. And basically, like you take a piece of paper, you fold it in half and put the pencil right through the two pieces of paper. So you actually cut the distance out because you're actually traveling through a higher dimensional connective point. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. That our interconnectivity is radically different than we think that it is. Like when it comes to energy healing, for instance, distance work works, right? And that's because our fields, our bodies are separate. You could be anywhere in the world, right? I can get on a Zoom call with you or a phone call, and we could do an energy healing session, and our fields are connected in real time, simultaneously interacting with each other without any drag based on the distance in space, right?
Mm.
That's because we're connected at a different level through these higher dimensions, which is where the language of the field comes in.
So just to give
Um,
everyone some context, like how connected are you and I right now?
well, at that energetic level, we're interacting. There's a flow of energy between you and I based on how we're vibrating, how we're communicating, what's our internal state, and what we're kind of sharing with one another at that more energetic level. And anybody who's listening to this is plugging into that field after the fact. So we're making this in real time, meaning it's an organic, living, permeable thing right now. And I don't mean living like separate sentient, but I mean it has its own kind of it's the third one in the room, so to speak, the combination of you as an individual, me as an individual, and us interacting, right? That's a field effect. And so we're going to create this field effect, and that's etched into this recording. And then somebody else is going to listen to this and they're going to go, oh, I love the vibes in this talk. And what they're doing is they're plugging into that energy. Think of listening to a piece of music. I mean, you listen to the music and you like to listen to where it takes you, different passages, different feelings. This is a kind of music that we're making at that energetic level. And we're totally connected. There's no separation at all energetically between us right now.
Mm, I love it. Keith, man, this was amazing. Thank you so much for all your insight. And I'll make sure to put that disclaimer at at the very beginning. So, disclaimer, this is just my subjective truth. I appreciate the humility. I feel like I'm so curious about the subjective experience of one's reality. And to your point, I feel like there are many truths. I feel like everyone has their own truth and they have to find it for themselves. And it's like that story, or that parable about the elephant, and everyone's describing the elephant. The five guys are describing the elephant totally different, right? I feel like that is truth. I don't think there is like I was reading the Gita today. It's like in there, I can't remember which chapter it was, but it's like, no man should fully know who I am or whatever, right? I don't think we could fully know the truth in its entirety, right? I feel like our experiences and William James talks about this. Like everybody's peak experience or spiritual experience is true for them, but it doesn't represent the whole, right? I feel like that's the truth, man. It's like whatever you resonate with, that's your truth. That is the truth, and right now, the truth is that we've had a pretty deep, impactful conversation, and I think a lot of people will get a lot from just hearing this and connecting with it. So, how can people connect with you further? How can they find out about field dynamics? How can they find out more about you, connect with you, send you an email, whatever? Like, what's that look like?
Yeah, so we have a website, fielddynamicshealing.com. And what we do is specialize in training people and also doing one-on-one session work. So myself and the other founder, Christabel, work with a lot of people one-on-one, doing private sessions. But we really created it not to be individual practitioners. That's something that we had been doing and will continue to do regardless. We did it to create a training program to give people an experience and an education to make a lot of the things that we've talked to about today practical, which is I have stuck energy. What is that stuck energy? How do I identify it and how do I let it go? And so that's what energy healing is the art of learning how to run energy, to bring in energy within your system and to have that interaction with the energies that you bring in. You could say channeling in a sense, or running energy, and having that energy flow through you such that you break up and release the blockages. And those blockages are these things that are holding us back. It's like a trauma that you experienced growing up. It's an emotional issue. It's a heartbreak from a relationship 10 years ago. It's a belief that you're not good enough or capable of achieving what you think you want to achieve. And energy healing is a way to do that very powerfully, very effectively, that people can practice on themselves and others. And is like it's not really being um, it's being represented so right now, and we created field dynamics to represent it and exemplify what it could be, kind of setting a 21st century standard, if you will, kind of upgrading the quality of the offering and the breadth and the depth. So for people who really are interested um, in making deep changes within themselves and are attracted to working in these subtle domains as a technique, we have an amazing kind of program for people. And so I would just suggest they check out the site and they feel free to reach out to us. And um, yeah, we even have a podcast,
Nice.
the Field Dynamics podcast.
There you go.
Yeah.
Is there anything on your heart that you feel like you want to share right now?
I generally think it's just really important that people find balance within themselves. And it's when we're in a balanced place that we actually find that guidance that we're looking for. And I don't mean external guidance necessarily. I mean, how is it that we discern, make choices, move forward, follow the trail, smell the scent, um, go towards that which you could say that we're destined to or truly attracted to. But it requires us getting a bit quiet and being in a balanced state. And that might mean like being connected to your body and your heart, right? That center again, your heart. And if people do that and listen to that, I do think that that's the best bet for finding and leading a fulfilling life where you really unfold and grow towards the sun, the flower towards the sun. I do think that it's what I have trusted and followed for a long time. It's the advice I give to people often. And it's not necessarily going to always be pretty if you do that, if you trust that, but that's not what it's supposed to be. The road is meandering, circuitous, dangerous, and ecstatic, and you have to kind of just trust a little bit.
It's not meant for everyone, my friend. Who wrote that book? It was Dr. Peck, I think the Road Less Traveled. I think it was like in the 80s or something like that, where it's a psychiatrist wrote this book about spirituality, and he basically says that the road isn't meant for everyone. Some people will travel a long distance and some people will travel a short distance, but the entire journey is not for them. They are okay with being ordinary. They do not strive to become God. And I was blown away when he said that because here's a scientist writing about becoming God, and I'm like, whoa. So yeah, Keith, man, this has been awesome, dude. I can't thank you enough, and I'm excited to see where this goes from here, bro.
Yeah, I'm really honored to be on the show. I thank you very much, Trey, and I thank your listeners for following it this far in. And yeah, maybe we'll get together again sometime down the line.